That's the signal. Danielle, can you go to the next slide, please? Welcome, Maggie. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Ken Spiro. I'm the president and founder of SchoolSIMS, and I'm delighted on behalf of the SchoolSIMS team to welcome you to this webinar today on building a supportive emotional culture for student and staff well-being. We're delighted to have you here. And as you can see, people have been introducing themselves in chat. Please feel free to do so, because part of the opportunity here is to actually engage in some dialogue, whether it's in chat or we'll have the opportunity to speak. And really hear other people's perspectives, because that's kind of an important component in dealing with contextual issues. But again, thank you, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest, John D'Auria, who's currently an adjunct faculty and senior consultant with William James College. Actually, next page, Danielle. He's been in the field for a long time, has written several books on very important books and some very relevant topics from a leadership in schools perspective. He was also the professor in practice at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. We've actually been working together on and off for a number of years and co-authored one of our simulations on race when he was heading up at Teachers 21. And every time I interact with him, it's an opportunity to learn something else. So we're delighted to welcome him here as part of this session. And as before handing it off to John, I just wanted to, for those of you who are not familiar with simulation, in dealing with this kind of topic where you're dealing with emotional, a supportive culture and well-being for staff, for students, it's an interesting challenge from a leadership perspective, because it's all about trade-offs, right? You can have, when you're dealing with something that's talking about the supportive culture, for one person, support may be just tell me what to do. For another person, it could be, well, kind of help me along, help me think it through and help me to actually do it. And for somebody else, it'll be just leave me alone and let me do my job. And that's, each one of them would define their desire as a supportive culture from an emotional perspective. And yet, as a leader, how do you navigate when those are exclusive objectives? That you need to be able to flex in establishing and navigating the leadership of a building where you're going to have a building filled with this kind of staff, and at the same time, even more when you're dealing with students. And that requires one to be able to think and exercise good judgment and knowing you're not going to get it right? Because when you make decisions for one person, it obviously will go counter to what another person may want, but obviously, the climate is something that we're going to establish that's contextual. And this is something that requires, there are books written on developing a supportive culture. There are papers, there's research, and all those things. And those are wonderful and very, very provide great insight. The challenge is implementing, because that is always based on the moment and being able to navigate and make decisions when there are obviously trade-offs and in that specific moment. And the only way we get better at that is through experience. But of course, the School of Hard Knocks is really rather painful. So how do we, in fact, provide opportunities for scalable experience? Next slide, Danielle, please. So what we do is simulations. We know from other high-stakes industries that simulations approximate experience. It's again, that adage that experience is the best teacher. And we know that you wouldn't put a pilot in a plane. You wouldn't put a doctor or nurse into a patient suite or surgical suite without hours, or in the military, right? Without hours and hours of simulation. Why don't we require the same kind of thing with our administrators, with our heads of school or assistant heads of school, or even teachers from that perspective, right? The opportunity to be able to engage in critical thinking where I can make mistakes, right? The value of experience is in the opportunity to fail, but to fail safely so I can use it for reflection. Next slide. So the opportunity with simulation is, and especially with our form of simulation, is really that we can provide experience, and you'll experience one here today in a little bit, but also that it be scalable, right? It has to be able to be something that heads of school can play for their own development. Heads of school can run a sim with their leadership team and get an opportunity for aligned decision-making or in team building. Or a head of school can run it with the entire staff, where we're engaging in the leadership of a school, or it can be a teaching sim relative to at the classroom level. And the experience can be had then from the standpoint of provoking discussion and insight on perspective of the individuals, and at the same time provoke conversation amongst peers and colleagues, because obviously there's no shortage of need to be able to engage with the team and know that you're not alone, because you are supported by the team, and that's the whole idea of a supportive culture. And so using this modality to be able to provide this is what we do, and especially around topics as the one that we've selected today. Danielle, next slide, please. So simulations really are kind of a choose your own adventure exercise. And again, you're going to experience one, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about this. But really, it's an opportunity to provide leaders with, or aspiring leaders, an opportunity to practice in authentic contexts in which they'll have to exercise judgment, but then also get to experience the consequences, because there's always blowback. And the next slide. And we've designed simulations around a variety of problems of practice, both from the leadership perspective, also from the teaching perspective, so that they can be utilized with all student-facing staff across the building. And with that, as a quick background, wanted to hand it off to John D'Auria to talk about building a supportive emotional culture for students and staff well-being. John, take it away.
Thank you, Ken. I wanted to just provide with a few slides some background knowledge that links to the sim that you're going to see in a few minutes. And in my work as a consultant across the country with different educational leaders, a typical challenge that emerges, particularly post the pandemic, has been the changes that leaders are trying to implement. But then as they look at the implementation, they don't see the strong commitment that they would like to see. In some cases, they actually see significant resistance, and how to work with the staff around that is a leadership challenge. And so I want to talk about that right now. And it's surprising, because when we, as leaders, oftentimes when we see that kind of poor implementation by some individuals or resistance, where we tend to go sometimes is to look at the individuals involved. And we think, what could we do differently with these individuals to either move them forward, address their resistance? And we tend to look at it from that perspective. And what I would like to do is offer a slightly different perspective. Not that that one is incorrect, but sometimes an alternative perspective could be very helpful. And in that case, what I really want you to look at and think about is something called organizational health. Next slide, please. And organizational health has two important components. One of them is this ability of leaders to balance two things: psychological safety, which I'll talk about in a minute, and accountability. They're both needed, and how do you create that balance is going to be very important. And the second thing, and this is really challenging, how do we allow stakeholders to engage in a really healthy and respectful dissent? Sometimes it's going to get heated, but creating that ability for people to disagree respectfully is an important aspect of organizational health. Next slide, please. So when we look at the first challenge, balancing psychological safety with accountability, which from the perspective of current research tends to be the main challenge of leadership. How do we balance these two important things? And we look to the work of Amy Edmondson from the Harvard Business School to really give us insight into this. Next slide, please. So Amy's research was really fascinating, because she went around trying to look at organizations that were able to adapt to rapid change. There was all sorts of technological changes that were happening. There were all sorts of organizational challenges that were happening. And certainly schools, especially since the pandemic, have had to adapt to social changes, differences in special education, technology, AI. How do we create a nimble reaction to this change? And when she went around, she discovered that certain organizations were able to adapt much more effectively than others. And one of the key ingredients was psychological safety. Next slide, please. And her research said in these organizations that she saw effective adaptation, it was the adults or the workers became comfortable with an odd set of things: not knowing, not being right, asking for help, reporting mistakes, re-strategizing quickly after failing, and very interesting, disagreeing openly and respectfully, both with colleagues and those with more authority. This is a very unusual list. It's not the classic leadership list that we studied in leadership school, but Edmondson's research has been critical for us to understand how important this is. Next slide, please. And when there's sufficient psychological safety, it allows for healthy dissent. And healthy dissent, it turns out, is necessary to achieve the kind of commitment and full-bodied implementation of new approaches that we're looking for. Next slide, please. So another way of looking at this, just from a different angle, is from the work of Peter Lencioni and his look at effectiveness of teams. And Lencioni's work, I've always found fascinating. Some people find it controversial. Some people don't agree with it, but I thought it would be helpful, given the simulation, to at least be aware of it if you aren't already. And according to Lencioni, for a team, whether it's a whole school, faculty, or a small leadership team, to be effective, you have to go through these stages in this pyramid, and each one is important for the next stage. And if you look at the bottom, the first thing that's needed is there has to be sufficient trust. And Lencioni defines trust in a very interesting way. He says it's the ability of team members to acknowledge mistakes openly to each other and to be able to ask questions that suggest they may not know how to do something. They may need more help. And this is sometimes very hard for veteran teachers. And in a sense, it's his term for psychological safety, that if we can say that we need more help, we don't really understand something, and if we try to implement something that's new and make a slight mistake or a modest mistake, but can learn from it, then there's sufficient trust. And Lencioni says, if there's sufficient trust, then we have to next navigate conflict. And this is really interesting. He posits that if there isn't sufficient trust, people are not going to engage in conflict. What's typically going to happen is people are going to hold back. They'll keep their critical comments to the parking lot or share it with their colleagues, but they're not going to say it openly at meetings. Or in some cases, they will allow one or two individuals to speak out constantly and get a reputation for being somewhat demonstrative at meetings, but it's not a full-body discussion where people are engaging in their various perspectives. And what's most interesting to me about Lencioni's work is that if there's sufficient trust and if people navigate conflict effectively, then we get commitment. And this is really powerful, because if you're at a place in your school where you are questioning whether there is sufficient commitment to a new strategy, a new approach, a new idea, rather than just looking at the individuals who are blocking that implementation or negating that strategy, another way to think about it is to say, organizationally, does our organization, has it produced enough trust? Is it allowing people to really ask questions and get the help that they need? And have we navigated conflict effectively? And in my own words, it's sort of like, have we been able to have that full-bodied, really, in some cases, heated discussion that shows that we have differences of opinion, but we can really get through them and navigate it. And it's only then, when we have those three things, trust, navigation of conflict, and commitment, that we get the accountability we're looking for and ultimately the attention to results. Next slide, please. So Lencioni suggests that if we do not navigate conflict, we're not going to get the commitment we're looking for. People are going to smile and nod and say they agree, but then when they think they're not being observed, they're going to go back to their old practices. Next slide, please. But navigating conflict is challenging. It's not necessarily the strong suit that we are equipped with as leaders. And one of the things we're beginning to see is, in order to navigate conflict effectively, one has to become a really effective listener. Next slide, please. And from the work of Carol Coughlin, we've learned that administrators have three types of listening that they do. The first one, and probably the most prominent one, is listening to fix it. We know how to put out fires. People come to us with problems, and boy, do we listen to fix it. Sometimes, particularly lately, with the polarization that has increased in our school communities, we're listening to win. We want to win the debate. We want to prove that our perspective is the right perspective. But Coughlin's work suggests what's really needed now to really navigate the conflicts that we see or the divisions is listening to understand. And this is something that I think can really benefit leaders tremendously. Next slide, please. Now, listening to understand has some parts to it. The first is the ability to actually be authentically curious. And authentic curiosity is really interesting because people think it's automatically asking questions. But I remember when my high school son came in late for his curfew, and I was upset. And the first thing I said, Mike, do you know what time it is? Do you know when your curfew is? And I just asked him two questions. I don't think he thought I was being authentically curious. So you got to think about the fact, are you really interested in learning? Are you really interested in hearing someone's perspective? If you are, then you have to listen carefully and be able to paraphrase back what they said, in a summary form. And finally, the third part is, and this is the part that's often missed, you also have to do a decent job at reflecting the feelings that you're hearing in the content. So it's this idea that I'm curious and I'm going to say something back to you that shows that I'm really hearing not only your ideas, but some of the feelings that are part of it. And if you do that well, you're looking for a reaction from the other person to almost say, I couldn't have said it better myself. And at that point, next slide, please. It's sort of this idea that when you're confronted with criticism or wrong sounding idea, if you could listen to understand, which has these components of authentic curiosity and listening to understand, and then you get to say these magic words. The next bullet, please. I have a different perspective. And having a different perspective doesn't mean you agree with the person. And this is the tricky part for leaders, is they think if that kind of listening, of really listening carefully, paraphrasing it back, sharing a person's feeling, that they're unintentionally communicating agreement. But actually what we're communicating is respect. Respect for their ideas and understanding for their ideas. And that respect allows us to say, we have a different perspective. And as you engage in the simulation that Ken is going to bring you to, I would love for you to think of these ideas, this notion of psychological safety, this notion of engaging in a thoughtful and heated conflict and listening to understand, and see if this is helpful as you navigate this simulation. Take it away, Ken.
Thank you so much, John. That was great. I mean, I certainly, as always, it's an opportunity for learning. So now as we talk about, please feel free, by the way, if you have questions, please submit them in chat. Love to hear from you. And again, if you're thinking it, probably somebody else is as well. And it is worthy. These topics, these issues are contextual, right? They're really interesting ideas and frameworks, and based on the research as quoted by John in terms of where they're coming from. But they have to be processed through our own experiences, right? Through the people that we work with, the context that we're operating within. And that's part of the value of why we like to blend content of this form, but now the opportunity to apply it, the opportunity to work with it, to see how do we flex this to work for us when we're dealing with this kind of listening, as John was describing, when maybe the person that we're talking to is not somebody we particularly like. Or, we're not, right? We have people that we work with that we like, that we less. Right? We have parents that we work with. And again, we may have opinions. Doesn't matter what our opinions are, right? We have a job to do and we have to be able to navigate. But how do we get practice at doing that By putting the two together, but by blending the content with the simulation, it allows for a more robust opportunity and to surface perspectives, because those perspectives are key. If your staff has different perspectives, if you have different perspectives, each of those perspectives are valid, and we all benefit by having them surfaced to enhance our own perspective. So if we can go down and start the sim, that'd be great.
Welcome. Welcome to the Overcoming Resistance simulation created by SchoolSims. In this simulation, you will manage consensus and commitment to changes in a group with diverse perspectives and beliefs. You will be called upon to manage group members that are very resistant to change. Click on the Next button to the bottom right to begin.
Wait, hold on. Oh, 1 second. So when we do a sim, the first thing that's important to note, and we're going to go through several screens now of context setting. When wanting to have an experience around contextual issues, context is important, right? It's taking place in a building, not your building, but it could be. And we're going to deal with people, not avatars. We're going to deal with video and text and stills, because, well, they're not your people, but they could be. And the opportunity to see ourselves in the action. And so we're going to set up the context. We're going to introduce the school, the community, your role. Again, it's going to be us making decisions together. But just to get an understanding of that context, because situational awareness is a key element, as John was describing, in terms of being able to apply these skills and understand the application of psychological safety and accountability, right? That's going to apply, and listening, right? That is going to be contextual by nature. How we do it, when we do it, how we communicate it, so to speak, all important. So we're going to start with some context, and then we'll get into the flow of the scenario. Go ahead, Danielle. Thank you.
Always forward. As in the real world, there are no opportunities for you to go backwards in the simulation. You will make choices and then deal with their consequences. However, unlike the real world, you can have a do-over and retake this simulation as many times as you like, trying different options each time. We hope you'll do that, reviewing the concepts presented in this simulation and practicing them in your real environment.
So following on context, we're going to have an opportunity for judgment and make decisions, as you'll see in a moment, as the Choose Your Own Adventure type exercise implies. But then there is also important that we deal with consequences, right? There's always blowback, right? Many of the decisions that we have to make in the school are going to have trade-offs, and those trade-offs comes with consequences, and it's important to navigate the consequences as well, right? So in a case study, right, we talk about all the things that we would do in the case, but then we got to talk about what happens after we do whatever we do, and you're going to live it, right? So there's anywhere from 6 to 10 decisions in a particular sim, so you get the opportunity to have a real experience dealing with the ebb and flow of a situation as it plays out. And then lastly, to be able to have the opportunity for feedback. So experience is the best teacher, but only when there's the opportunity for reflection. And so we make sure that that opportunity manifests in a feedback report, but we'll get to that in a moment. Go ahead, please.
It begins. Notice that the clock in the top right corner has just started. You now have about 30 minutes to complete the simulation. You'll also notice the progress bar to the right of the clock. This will track your progress through the simulation.
Yeah, you can forward
Playing
this.
this simulation at your role. You are head of school for Stony Brook Academy, located in an affluent suburb of a large metropolitan area. You have been in this position for the past 4 years and have worked hard to develop credibility and rapport with the faculty and staff. The school. Stony Brook Academy was established in 1975. It is a modern independent school with a very diverse population of students. It has developed a fine reputation in the community, has kept pace with growth, and has a very dedicated faculty and staff. The main competition for Stony Brook is a nearby private school that offers a cutting-edge, STEMS-heavy curriculum. The community. The community is very attractive, particularly to young, upward mobile families. Thus, much of the growth in the community has been young families. With this growth comes accompanying high expectations regarding the quality of education. A theme that Stony Brook's math department curriculum is considered boring and antiquated has been developing since you joined the school, and expectations of change are growing rapidly.
So as you process the context, right, there may be things here that align or that don't align, right? The opportunity for dissonance is an important element because, again, it provides that opportunity for different perspectives and insights, right? Something may jump out at you that you find compelling or questionable. And asking that question, having the opportunity for dialogue, the underlying goal of this modality is critical thinking and team building. And so the opportunity to engage in this kind of safe conversation is key to the opportunity. And again, we want to make sure that there's space for everyone to see themselves in it. And so that those perspectives can be surfaced and shared.
The challenge. The school's mission statement was updated last year. After much discussion, the following was added. The school will prepare students to bring knowledge and skills to solve problems, make sense of information, and know how to gather and evaluate evidence to make decisions. These are the kinds of skills that students develop in science, technology, engineering, and math, including computer science. We will enhance our STEM's curriculum to meet these growing needs. You are challenged to align programs with this vision enhancement as quickly as possible. Moving forward, in your annual review, the Head of School Support and Evaluation Committee commends you on your many successes. It's noted that the goal of using best practice and educational techniques to engage students has had a mixed response. In some departments, there are subsets of teachers who have made changes, but the math department has not made changes at this point. Your board president notes that this needs to be addressed in order to bring the entire school into alignment with the recently revised mission. You can ask for a private meeting with the board president. In this meeting, explain why you are not able to accomplish this. Share with the board your strategy to phase in the changes. You have made a decision to aggressively pursue this goal in all departments except math, which will continue its current course until results are evaluated in the other departments. Commit to addressing this situation aggressively. You plan to bring the math department along with the rest of the school. Agree that the mission is important. Then caution the board that implementation is only assured when there is a buy-in and that you are working with the faculty to gain and enhance commitment.
So as per the description, right, we're going to have to make a decision. Then can you just make sure you move the poll over to the side a little bit so people can still see the choices? What we're going to ask you to do before we actually talk about this is to just choose which one you would go with from the standpoint of as a next step. Given the challenges that we're facing, right? We have the mission. We haven't been succeeding at this point. So we have gotten feedback that we've got to make a change or got to move things forward. What's our first step at this point in terms of moving forward? And so you see there's choice options 1, 2, 3, and 4. The reason for number 5 is, well, maybe you don't agree with any of those, and that's okay, because then we can talk about what you would do, and then cycle back to, well, you know, as with our experiences in life, we may want to do something, but due to constraints in the circumstance, we can't. And we have to come up with option B. So the opportunity to first, let's vote on what you would do in terms of making a choice here, and then we'll talk about it in a moment. Take 10 more seconds. Okay. Wow. Okay. So anybody want to share why they chose 3? And go ahead, just unmute yourself and speak out. Anyone?
Well, I'm assuming that because there was probably some significant conversation that went into the building and the restructuring of the mission statement, that there's been plenty of time for buy-in. And so I agree with number 5, that you've got to get that buy-in and get that commitment from the faculty. But I'm just working off the assumption that everyone contributed to the updated mission statement. And so no need to, that has given us the buy-in that we need, and we need to move aggressively at this point.
That's great. Thank you. And the beauty of that is, when you said that, you made an assumption, and which is great, right? Because there was the space to do that. But validating assumptions is an important thing. And because your assumptions may not be the same as others, and this gives that opportunity to see if there were maybe other assumptions. Anybody else want to share either why you chose 3, or if you agreed with that, why you didn't choose any of the others? Or is there one in particular that you didn't like? Okay, we won't take a lot of time since we had such commitment to the one everybody voted on number 3. But this is kind of the opportunity that we engage with when, you as, as a head of school or an assistant head of school, if you were deploying SIMs in your building, this is the manner in which the engagement can happen. And to facilitate from that standpoint, and that opportunity to model, if you will, some of that healthy dissent, right? It's okay to have your own opinion, right? Let's talk about it. You can be tongue in cheek. You can actually have, express an opinion, and we can actually have at it. And in terms of being able to, if we're all here for the purpose of addressing our students, then having the conversation is valuable. Let's go ahead and move forward.
Time passes. Several months following your annual review, after discussions, brainstorming, and significant coaxing, it becomes clear that the head of the math department, I recall, is pleased with the curriculum, associated materials, and instructional methodologies currently being employed at Stony Brook. Although aware of the directive to update, he is stalling and avoiding your efforts to stimulate change. Following one of your weekly meetings with Lauren Order, board president, she expresses concern.
I continue to hear frustration on the part of parents that math department lessons are old school, that they're boring and not well coordinated with other STEM classes. I've also heard that some of the teachers are not using the devices from the one-to-one program, and that there are teachers openly expressing concerns to parents. Either they're being pressured to implement new methods to make things work, or that the school is being too soft on those teachers that don't want to change.
Board President continues. The board president goes on to remind you that as part of your annual review, you have a goal to ensure that the math department is meeting the expectations of the school about the mission. You are far from meeting that goal, and she expects improvement in that area. Additionally, she shares that it is rumored that a new school will be starting in the area that will be based on 21st century education models and will be less expensive. She tells you to prioritize making sure that Stony Brook is on the cutting edge of excellence in STEM education, not least math. Your response. You express appreciation for the direct feedback. In confidence, you then explain that you are having problems with Mr. Call. He is not in favor of the changes and is stalling on requiring the department to implement them. You go on to explain that you have a group of younger teachers who themselves are upset because they see no forward momentum. You express your concern that should these teachers find opportunities elsewhere, they might jump ship.
When you think about the pyramid that John shared and thinking about where we are in the trust or the opportunity to express or navigate conflict, right? Clearly, we're a little short on commitment. And how this manifests and how this cascades is pretty easy to see, right? So how do you get in the way of this and turn it around so that you can actually accomplish the goals that are both you're accountable for, but also that are probably better for the school in general? Go ahead, Danielle.
You have my full support and that of the board in exercising your leadership to accomplish these goals. Please let me know how I can help you.
Of course, aligning stakeholders is the key
Get
element.
things moving? With this encouragement from the board president, but persistent resistance from the math department, which of the following tactics will you use to get things moving? Ask the board president to extend the implementation window by a year. Explain that you feel it's important to clear several obstacles first. Call a meeting with the math department faculty. You need to resolve the growing impasse, and grassroots support may be what you need. Meet with the math department head. Emphasize that the two of you need to sort this out and move forward. Apply pressure on the math department head for alignment. Tell Mr. Call that if he is not able to align, that you will not renew his contract.
Before the poll, Danielle, just take a look at the choices. Think about what you'd want to do. And one of the things that is important here is that sometimes when we're writing the choices, you may want to do more than one of these. But what simulation allows us the flexibility to do is to kind of parse time. You have to do something first, right? We can only do one thing at a time. So what do you do first? Because that kind of influences what happens after, even if you do these in sequence. But it's important to think about kind of what would you lead with in terms of this next step. So give it a second, and then we can release the poll. Okay, Danielle, poll. Take 10 more seconds. Okay, close the poll. What did we come up with this time? Huh. This is quite the aligned group. Okay, so the choice is to call a meeting with the math department faculty. Does anybody want to share why they chose that one?
Well, for me, it was either the faculty or the department head. And again, I mean, we can, you got to go with some assumptions here, but I'm assuming that the department head and all the faculty are going to be in here. And the idea of trying to suss out, where the hesitation or where the obstacles may be coming from, we might be able to do that by talking to the entire faculty at once. So that was my thought.
Right. Is there a circumstance in which you would, or is there a way of looking at it that you would say, well, actually, I should meet with the department head first versus the faculty with, assuming that it's the department heads there, when you would do, with the individual versus the group?
I'm just, if I thought that the department head was in line with the direction that the school was going, then I might solicit his support and saying, look, let's you and I sit down together with the faculty and figure out where the hesitation lies and but at this point, I'm not sure if it's the department head or if it's someone else on the faculty or all of the above.
Great. Thank you for that. Anybody else? And Rob, I appreciate your willingness to step up.
Sure.
Hey, any other comments or thoughts? And again, in terms of the nature of the kind of conversation, if one is doing this from an alignment perspective, right? If as the head of school, you're running this with your team, you want to get at some of the underlying stylistic differences, right? Some people are more comfortable in the group, some people are more comfortable with the individual, irrespective of the context, right? That just may be a stylistic preference. Or being, wanting that delay, right? I don't want to be accountable for this right now. This obviously is happening in the context of running the rest of the building. Maybe it makes sense to push back. Again, stylistically, these are all, what we try to do is come up with not the things that you should do, because those sometimes tend to be too obvious, but the things that we do, right? The things that we're influenced by our own bias to action, our own or inaction, our avoidance of conflict or embracing conflict, right? These are the kinds of things that we need to reflect upon as leaders, but also have the opportunity to allow our teams to reflect upon them so we can process them together. But in the meantime, let's go ahead. We'll close this and go on to the next, see what happens.
Meeting with Math Department faculty. You've decided to meet with the entire Math Department. The first to arrive, as I recall. As the others begin arriving, you sense a heightened level of tension. You begin by saying, I have called this meeting to make clear my expectations going forward. As you know, I am committed to bringing in the latest teaching techniques to all of our STEM classes, including our Math Department. I believe that it will increase engagement of students and is in line with educational best practice. I am disappointed that there has been such a lack of progress in this area. I expect all members of the department to make an absolute priority of this issue.
And of course, one can actually use the opportunity to reflect upon the language, obviously put words in your mouth, but in terms of at any point in time, and that's why we kind of don't make this as a continuous video, is that this may provoke opportunities for additional discourse, for different approaches to navigating use of language, because that's obviously language is important in terms of being able to suss out, as was mentioned, the what's underlying this. And get at the different perspectives to be able to implement. Go ahead.
One teacher's response. The teacher responds by saying, I find your comments very offensive. It is not just a matter of what you like to call best practice. This question goes to the heart in our math studies. The math department has taught the same way for years. Our students do well in a standardized testing and compare well with students throughout the nation. Furthermore, if you ever took the trouble to come into my classroom, you would notice that my students are much more engaged than those students who are supposedly having best practice.
One could have some fun diagnosing that, huh?
Another teacher's response. The teacher responds by saying, I find all of this very demoralizing. The school has set the direction and the students in math should be able to benefit from the same teaching methodologies that are having such a positive impact in other subjects. We can't keep debating whether it is better to do it this way or the old way. We need to be a collaborative department and we need to move forward. I am asking you as head of school to put an end to the circular discussion and move us forward.
Well, it's nice that the teachers are willing to share.
The math department head replies. Mr. Call responds by saying, I think that some important points have been made. It is not good for the school or students for us to rush into any decisions on this matter, and so much is at stake. I suggest we form a committee of representatives of the different opinions, and that we ask this committee to come up with proposals in the next few months that will allow us to move forward while balancing everyone's legitimate concerns. Encourage alignment. You briefly consider Mr. Call's reply and then say, It's important that you and I come to an understanding on this and that we are able to move forward. Mr. Call considers this and then says,
I agree completely. Let's work together until we're able to reach alignment on what is best for the school.
Danielle,
steps to alignment.
we got an email, so there was a little interruption there. So if you can go to the diamond and click on that and see what the email was that came in.
Email from Ira Call, from Head of Math Department to Head of School, regarding meeting with department. I am extremely frustrated with the fact that you held a meeting with the department without speaking directly with me first. It is not appropriate or professional. I would like to discuss this at our next meeting.
So Ira was not pleased with
Align-
the choice of meeting with the team. But again, this is not to say what it's right or wrong, right? This is this particular context and having the opportunity to examine, well, why is that? And it may point out some issues about Ira and the relationship with him and his approach to things. But is that opportunity to provoke, because this is just an experience, not the experience. We're not promoting a best practice here, particularly. It is in this context what is happening, and it invites the opportunity for discussing what people agree with, what we disagree with. But this is a different from a decision-making perspective, right? So we're talking about alignment, and we're going to take steps to create alignment, how are we going to do that? What are some of the steps that we would engage in order to actually achieve that? And this is free form. This is an opportunity to just, obviously, if this was a team together, we'd be able to type in. And so I actually would invite people to do, if you don't mind, is to think about some of the things you would do from an alignment perspective and just put them in chat so we can put them in the dialogue box. And what's typed in here, just so you know, from a sidebar perspective, is captured and placed into the feedback report that manifests at the end. So there is a record of it. We don't track from that standpoint because we believe in kind of distinguishing between assessment and development. When people are playing this, we want them to feel like it's okay to make mistakes. Nobody's watching, so to speak, because you can actually assign these individually or, again, playing them together, depending on your focus on from a professional learning standpoint, synchronous or asynchronous. But this provides that opportunity, that space, if you will, for people to just engage in trying stuff out, even if they think it's a bad answer, but they want to see what would happen and experience that consequence to be able to have at it. So if you don't mind taking a minute and just putting some ideas in chat, what you would do from an alignment perspective in your building, how would you go about, what are some of the steps that you would take to establish alignment? Well, in the interest of time, the next screen will actually provide a process and we'll actually think that through. So it is an opportunity to both freeform before giving you choices, but then, Daniel, if you go to the next screen.
Alignment strategy. Okay, you've outlined a general process. The following algorithm is a commonly used tool used in business to create alignment. However, the steps are not in the correct order. In what order will you do the following steps? Select the first step you would now take. Brainstorm ideas that overcome obstacles. Identifying options is important. Express your concerns. The other party needs to hear your concerns. Allow Ira to express specific concerns. You need to understand the other party's concerns. Express understanding of his concerns. This ensures perspectives are shared. Make a proposal. Express your ideas as a proposed course of action. Have Ira reflect back your concerns. This ensures perspectives are shared. Build an action plan. Define steps to move the issue forward.
Any thoughts on which you would do first?
Maybe it's time to float a proposal.
You start with a proposal, okay? And what it's going to do here from this standpoint is it's going to have us reflect. Once you choose one, then the next screen is going to be the rest of the choices, and you're going to keep cycling through this until you define the process. And there really is an opportunity to think through from the standpoint of what we're trying to do from a climate in the building. We obviously have a specific objective of overcoming this resistance, and we need alignment. What are the steps that we want to go through in order to achieve that? And obviously the opportunity to provoke discussion or critical thinking throughout that process, and then things pick up on the other end relative to implementing the alignment plan. But in the interest of, I'm going to come back to this. In the interest, I want to make sure that we respect people's time and being able to come to some level of closure at the top of the hour. We're happy to continue after the top of the hour, but we certainly understand that people have their day structured. And so just to take a moment outside of this, if somebody can make me a co-host, forgot to ask for that. Just want to take a moment just to, first of all, any questions while we're here? And please feel free to unmute and just chime in. But one of the things I did want to share we wanted to share real quickly is when we talk about this idea of, you get a sense, hopefully, of the power of the blend, that in whatever professional development you're doing, or this can be blended with meetings with a coach or a mentor, or it can be blended with assigned into a PLC. The Sims are very flexible in terms of what you incorporate them with. They should always be done in concert with something, right? Because it does allow for that opportunity for engagement around, again, whatever it might be, and from a subject matter perspective, and the potential for the opportunities with from the team perspective. But just so you get a sense of, from the building perspective, we have a portal which allows you to deploy the library of simulations, and from a implementation standpoint, these are the simulations that we have that are specifically independent school. So the opportunity to look at things from a leadership lens, from a teaching lens, each of these is similar to what we've just been going through, an opportunity to engage in dealing with these kinds of challenges and do it either individually or collectively. But being able to manage that is done via our portal, which you can see here, which you would get access to, and allows you to deploy and self-deliver, right? The goal of the simulations is not for you to come to us, or that you require any outside faculty. This is something that can be you can obviously utilize outside faculty if you already are engaged with coaches or mentors, or again, have a relationship with consultants. But this can be done independent of that, and done individually within your systems. And through the portal, it allows you to navigate the simulations. You can choose from, and you can select from using the filtering system, the ones that you want to be able to see. You can assign the Sims, to individuals. You can assign them to yourself and then be able to deploy them in a synchronous way. How you manage it is totally up to you, and you have control within the deployment of this to support the broader objectives that you have within your buildings relative to skill development, whether it's strategy implementation, whether it's just straight up team building. The opportunity to engage in these kinds of ways is totally within your control. And there are opportunities for some reports. We also have links to the webinars like this one that we do, so you'd have access to past webinars, our blog, some best practices around ways of thinking about, or some frequently asked questions, and some kind of insights in terms of structuring the deployment of simulations. All those things are available within that. The one other thing I wanted to share is I mentioned that feedback report that comes at the end to show you what that looks like. And this is a PDF version, so that somebody printed. It shares. This is of our parent-teacher conference simulation. So one of the other simulations that are in the library from a teacher perspective. So this one opens up with an open-ended question about how would you prepare? What would you walk into? What would you be prepared with in meeting teachers and meeting parents at a parent-teacher conference? And so here's some considerations that happen no matter what you write. And here we just capture, and this was my simple writing, just so that I could have it manifest in the feedback report. But this will be, again, that opportunity for, before, not giving choices, but just open-ended, what would you do to prepare, and what's the import of those various pieces of information? And then it goes through all of the choices that were made, reminds them of the scenario, what the learning objective in that scene was, remind them of their choice, the other choices that they didn't select. You can see the amount of time that was spent, but also specific feedback on the choice they made. And again, another opportunity for reflection, another opportunity for dialogue amongst peers in terms of, do they agree with the feedback? In our context, maybe it would be different. Why would it be different? The nature of our relationships, any of those things can come out. It's just another opportunity for that to happen. And this is the feedback report that you would have. What we can do is provide you with a copy of the feedback report of the sim we started, if you're interested. And also, there is the opportunity, if you're interested in engaging in a free trial with respect to engaging with the simulations with what's left of this year, or going into planning for the coming year. So if you're interested, please feel free to click on the QR code or reach out to us. And that would be an option. We also have other resources, and I'll go back to the QR code in case you didn't get it. But these are some other resources that we have available that we can make available to you as you're reflecting on the kinds of things that you'd like to be able to do from a development perspective, from an alignment perspective, and again, from a team building perspective within your buildings. And with that, I'll open it up again to questions, thoughts. And if anybody's interested in continuing with the simulation, we'll be happy to do so. But just see if there's anything that anybody would like to chat about. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. All right, if anybody's interested in learning more or seeing additional simulations, please feel free to reach out. Or I'm sure you'll be getting the recording of the presentation if there's those you'd like to share it with. And again, we'd be happy to share additional simulations with you at your request. So please feel free to be in touch. And wanted to thank you all again for taking the time this afternoon to be with you. We appreciate the opportunity to engage and look forward to speaking with you at some point soon.